Good morning. My name is Brent Bozell, and I'm the chairman of For America. Thank you all for being here this morning. All of us here, standing here before you, represent a united front of American conservatives who are committed to defunding Obamacare for once and for all. For America, Tea Party Patriots, Club for Growth, Freedom Works, Citizens United, Family Research Council Action, and everyone else you see here standing on behalf of tens of millions of Americans are, quite frankly, fed up. We are sick and tired of politicians who solemnly pledge to fight for conservative principles when it's election season, only to ignore those promises when they come here to Washington. Stopping the impending Obamacare train wreck is the single most important issue facing the Congress today. Opposition to this awful law is at an all-time high and growing. Even President Obama's unions are jumping ship and calling for this terrible legislation to be stopped before it destroys this country. Senator Mike Lee and his call to defund Obamacare in the upcoming CR is our last chance to stop this monstrosity from destroying not only the best healthcare system in the world, but also our economy, by killing jobs, raising taxes, jacking up premiums, and making our healthcare system more expensive for families while exploding the national debt. Every single Republican in Congress voted against Obamacare. Most, if not all, Republicans will return to their districts or states during the upcoming recess and once again tell their constituents how absolutely committed they are to ending Obamacare. That dog won't hunt anymore. No more saying one thing at home and then something else here in Washington. No more excuses, no more delays, no more hiding under desks. Here is the bottom line message to every Republican in Congress who pledged to end this monstrosity. A vote to fund Obamacare breaks faith with your constituents and with the principles you claim to uphold. No more blaming just liberal Democrats. If you fund Obamacare, you own Obamacare. And when it comes to time to face re-election, we're going to make sure every voter knows how every member of Congress voted. I say this to my Republican friends. You came to Washington pledging to restore freedom while reducing the size of this increasingly oppressive and fiscally incoherent mess that we call the federal government. It's what you promised to your constituents. It is why they voted you in. It's why they expect something from you now. Do what you pledged. When the elites in this town turn on you, it is then that you'll know that you did the right thing. Return home a hero. With that, let me introduce one by one the people who will be speaking to you today. Our first speaker is Jenny Beth Martin, the chairman of Tea Party Patriots.
Thank you, Brent. Tea Party Patriots has a very simple message today to the House, the Senate, and the White House. Delay the implementation of Obamacare. That means delay its funding. The president acknowledged that Obamacare is not ready. That is why the White House announced a delay in implementing Obamacare for big business. That comes on the heels of many waivers that have already been granted to big labor because Obamacare is not ready for them either. Just yesterday, it was reported that the president was on Capitol Hill in closed-door meetings with Senate Democrats determining how to bypass the law and exempt members of Congress and their staff from the exchanges. But the president has offered no such delay or waiver for the American people. We're stuck with the individual mandate for a bureaucratic bill the White House admits we're just not ready to implement. The heads of the three biggest labor unions in the country told the president Obamacare will shatter their health care, and it will bring an end to the 40-hour work week. Almost 24 Democrats in the House voted with Republicans to delay the individual mandate. If Obamacare is not ready for big business, big labor, or big government, it is not ready for the American people. Delay the implementation of Obamacare. That means delay its funding. Congress has the opportunity to continue to fund all the other areas of the government and also to delay Obamacare through the temporary continuing resolution. This will simply delay funding for Obamacare for a year and will give all of us a chance to better understand what is in this bill before this train wreck is fully funded. To the Republicans in the House, we say, don't provide money for a law that's not ready to be implemented. It's time to delay. To the Democrats in the Senate, we say, how dare you deny a vote on bipartisan legislation to delay the employer and individual mandates? It's time to delay. And to the American citizens, we say, if you believe that your government should treat you and your family at least as well as it treats big business, big labor, and big government, then help us amplify your voice. We, the American people, demand Congress delay the implementation of Obamacare.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. Senator Mike Lee of Utah.
If the President of the United States won't protect the American people from this horrible law, then Congress must. Congress, after all, has the power of the purse. This is one of the last final powers that Congress has that it still jealously guards. Congress has the prerogative of deciding whether or not to fund program after program that we review every year. This is a program that President Obama himself has acknowledged won't work. It's unworkable. He can't implement the law as it's written. If he can't do it, he insists that he must do so by implementing and enforcing the law selectively, holding hardworking Americans to the fire, subjecting hardworking Americans to harsh penalties if they fail to comply with the law's exacting commands, while at the same time creating a generous carve-out for big business. This law will make health care unaffordable, as we long knew. This law, as the President wants to selectively implement it, will also make the entire scheme fundamentally unfair. This is a law that we need to remember is not just about Republicans versus Democrats anymore. It's not just about liberals versus conservatives. This law is about Washington, D.C. versus everyone else in the United States. Americans tend to believe by a margin of 2-1 that this law will make their family's health care situation worse, not better. Only 12% of Americans support the individual mandate. Businesses hate it, individuals fear it, even union leaders insist that this is going to make matters worse for the American worker. Meanwhile, Americans all over the place are going to see their health care costs, their premiums skyrocketing, and many people will be forced away from their doctors and from their existing health care plans. One way or another, we can stop this. Those of us who profess to be against this bad law, those of us who were elected to come here to Washington to represent our constituents at home who are afraid of this law, need to back up that very same thought, back up that very same opposition by demonstrating that if the President's not going to implement the law, we're not going to fund it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to say three things to you. Number one, now is the single best time and best opportunity to defeat Obamacare. Number two, this is a fight we can win. And number three, only the American people can win this fight. Why is now the best time to defeat Obamacare? Well, the reason is simple. There is bipartisan consensus. Obamacare isn't working. The wheels are coming off. The lead Senate author, Democrat Max Baucus, has described it as a huge train wreck. Major labor unions are one after another asking the president, please let us out of Obamacare. James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters, has said Obamacare is destroying the 40-hour work week that is the backbone of the American middle class. And even President Obama has been forced to admit failure when he unilaterally and contrary to law granted a waiver to every big corporation in America to delay Obamacare, the employer mandate, until after the next election. Now that is a powerful concession that Obamacare isn't working, because if Obamacare were working, if it were a good thing, President Obama would want it to kick in full before the next election. The fact that he wants it after the next election is a tacit admission this thing is broken. And it also raises the obvious question. If President Obama is willing to grant a waiver to giant corporations, why won't he grant the same waiver to hardworking American families? That leads to the second point. This is a fight we can win. We've heard lots of speeches about Obamacare. We've had lots of votes about Obamacare, none of which had any chance of passage. Here's what I believe should happen. 60 days from today, on September 30th, the continuing resolution that funds the federal government expires. The House of Representatives should pass a continuing resolution that funds the federal government in its entirety, every aspect of the federal government, except for Obamacare. And that continuing resolution should attach the legislative language that I have already filed in the U.S. Senate to defund Obamacare, to prohibit spending money on Obamacare, and to prohibit both discretionary and mandatory spending on Obamacare. Now, the next step, we know what will happen after the House passes that continuing resolution. President Obama and Harry Reid will scream and yell that the mean, nasty Republicans are threatening to shut down the government. And at that point, we have to stand up and win the fight. We have to go and make the argument. We have voted to fund the government. We want to keep the government open. We don't want a partial temporary government shutdown. Why is President Obama threatening to shut down the government in order to force Obamacare down the American people's throats? President Obama is willing to grant a waiver to giant corporations. Why is President Obama willing to shut down the federal government in order to deny that same waiver to hardworking American families? If we get 41 Republicans to stand together in the Senate, or 218 Republicans to stand together in the House, we can win this fight. Not another symbolic vote, which we've had far too many of, but this is where the rubber meets the road. The next 60 days, the decision will be made whether or not we continue to fund Obamacare. And that leads to my third and final point. Only the American people can win this fight. Look, if conventional Washington rules apply, this fight is unwinnable. If the only forum in which arguments are going to be advanced is closed-door meetings in the Senate and House, we will not have the votes. We don't have the votes in the Senate right now. We don't have the votes in the House. But I believe we can change that. If in the next 60 days, hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans stand up and demand of their elected officials do the right thing, that will change this public policy debate in Washington. There's a national website that was launched this week, don'tfundit.com, don'tfundit.com. In a matter of 5 days, 125,000 Americans have signed a national petition on don'tfundit.com. And if we see hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans lighting up the phone to their elected representatives saying, stand up and do the right thing. Follow through on your principles. Don't just talk a good game when you're home in state. Actually stand up and weather the fight. Look, there are many fights in Washington, and I think you should pick your battles. There is no battle more important than this opportunity right now to finally defund Obamacare. Obamacare is the biggest job killer in this country. It is hurting the economy. It is causing vulnerable workers, young people, Hispanics, African Americans, single moms to have their hours forcibly reduced. It is driving up the cost of your health care premiums. It isn't working. It's hurting health care, and now is the opportunity to do it. If the American people rise up and hold our elected officials accountable, and the people should hold every one of us accountable, including me, that's how we win this fight, and I am encouraged by this tremendous coalition of grassroots leaders across the country. In the next 60 days, I believe we're going to see a tsunami of the American people rising up to demand that Congress defund Obamacare.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Marco Rubio, Florida.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you all for coming and being here. So we're standing out here on a cloudy day when we're kind of wondering and uncertain whether it's going to rain on us or not. And it struck me that it's perfectly symbolic and appropriate of what Obamacare is doing to our country and to our economy. It hangs over our economy like a cloud of uncertainty, and people don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But here's what our working class and middle class Americans know right now. What they're starting to learn is that next year they may become part-time employees instead of full-time employees because of Obamacare. What they're starting to learn is that the insurance company that they have now and they're happy with may not be their insurance company on January 1st because of Obamacare. What they're starting to learn is the doctor they've been going to for 20 years may not be their doctor on January 1st because of Obamacare. Here's what seniors are learning and are about to learn about Obamacare. If you're on Medicare Advantage like my mom is, your benefits are about to change dramatically. All because Obamacare has taken about $150 billion out of it, including $11 billion this year. Not to strengthen Medicare, by the way, but to fund this failed experiment. The uncertainty that Obamacare is creating on our country, as the previous speakers pointed out, is not a partisan issue anymore. This is going to hurt every American. Democrats and Republicans are going to lose their existing coverage. Democrats and Republicans are going to lose their hours or their job. This is impacting everyone, and the proof is that in the last few days, even the union representing the IRS workers have asked to be exempted from Obamacare. The very workers who by law are entrusted with enforcing the law are asking to be exempted from it. And so to those of us who say that we are against Obamacare, September will give us the last best chance to actually do something about it. The fact of the matter is that if this thing goes into effect beginning October 1st, with the exchanges and all the mandates that start kicking in, it will do irreparable damage to our economy and to our country. I don't think you can say you're against Obamacare if you vote for a budget that funds it. And I think it's outrageous that the president and his allies are threatening to shut down the American government if it doesn't fund Obamacare. Obamacare is not more important than the United States. It's not more important than keeping our military folks paid. It's not more important than ensuring Social Security checks go out on time. But that's what the president is threatening to do. Because what he's saying is, unless you fund Obamacare, I won't sign a budget. That is an outrageous proposition and an unacceptable one. And my last point is this. I hope this law never goes into effect. I don't think it can be fixed. And I hope that its most damaging impacts will not be felt by our people, in particular the hardworking middle class that will pay the highest price of all. But if God forbid it does, every single one of us will have to go home and answer to people, why did you let this happen? And I, for one, and I know my colleagues as well, are not prepared to go home and tell people, well, we tried, but we couldn't. We have to be able to go home and say, we did everything we could. We took every step available to us. And that's why this is such an important issue. That's why defunding this in September in the short-term budget is so critical, because it truly is our last best chance to stop this law from moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Congressman Louis Gohmert of Texas.
Thank you so much, Brent. And to follow up on what Marco was saying, we owe future generations better than they're going to get with Obamacare. And for those who are always trying to figure out what the political motivation is, let me tell you, we've had meetings, we've talked about strategy, and here's what it comes down to. On the one hand, Obamacare passed without a single Republican in the House voting for it. So, from a political standpoint, if we stand back, let it all happen just as it was drafted, just as it was rammed through against the will of the American people, and then people can't get the surgery. 70, 75-year-olds, whatever the panel decides is the good number. People above that age will not get the hip they need. They will not get the knee they need. They may not get the pacemaker they need. And they'll wonder why, and their lives will be shortened. And we will move toward what some have said in tweets, gee, if the founders had lost the revolution, we'd all have universal health care. Yes, and that means that out of every 5 women that get breast cancer, 1 would be dead now. Who do you want to die in America that have breast cancer so that we're on a par with the English system? So we talked about it, politically speaking, and I know this may be hard for some to believe, but politically speaking, if we stand back and do nothing, America is going to find out the full impact of what Obamacare and President Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid did to them. And they're going to be angry and resentful, and they're going to have trouble ever getting their party elected to national seats again. On the other hand, our oath is to the Constitution. Our obligation is to the people of America. And as Marco pointed out, as people need health care, and this thing were to go into full full bore power, they're not going to get the health care they need. It'll all be equalized, so everybody will be getting less than the health care they would get without Obamacare. 20, 30 years from now, when people are dying earlier because they didn't get the health care they needed, and people are saying, well, what did you do to try to stop it? We did not want to be in the place of saying, well, you see, we decided it would be politically better for us if we just stood back and let this whole thing go into place, and it would really help us politically because people would never trust the Democrats again. We could not follow our oaths and let that happen without doing everything we could to stand in the way of health care that will cause people to suffer and die earlier, as universal health care has in other places in the world. So we owed an obligation, and we've stepped up. You may think it's political. It's exactly the opposite. We're doing it. Can you believe it? The president, who's supposed to be for the little guy, wants this bill in place for the individual. So the poor guy that's making $14,000 a year, 133% of the poverty, above the poverty level is what the bill says. If he doesn't pay thousands of dollars for a health care insurance policy that he cannot afford, then this Democratic administration will see that his income tax is raised, which he cannot afford either. And for, as the president said at a town hall meeting at the White House to a lady that asked, would my mother get a pacemaker and so she could live for 10 more years or so? And he said, maybe we're better off giving her a pain pill. Look, we're standing for the seniors that are going to get a pain pill under Obamacare instead of their pacemaker. We're standing for the elderly that will not get a hip replacement or a knee replacement or the things they need, or it will take too long to have the surgery and whatnot that they need. We're standing for them. We're standing for the guy that makes $14,000 that can't afford to have this IRS and this administration pop him for more income tax. We're standing for the people, and I hope the president understands that, and eventually, if we stand strongly enough, comes around and starts standing for the people instead of his party. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Jim Brightstein of Oklahoma. Thank you.
Well, I am honored to stand here with these men today, and certainly I'd like to make sure everybody understands there's an effort in the House of Representatives, as there is in the Senate, to defund Obamacare. And this is just the first step in a repeal. And I want to be clear that we all believe, everybody standing here believes that we have issues in this country with health care. We understand that and we know that. We have issues with access, we have issues with affordability, and there are ways to address these issues that don't include Obamacare. And when you think about Obamacare, everybody here, everybody watching on TV, we are going to all have to buy health insurance that perfectly conforms to what the president would like us to have. And if you don't, you are going to be punished. And the question is, how are you going to be punished? You're going to be punished when you do your taxes at the end of the year. This is why it is so critical. How many thousands of IRS agents are required to enforce Obamacare? A question we still don't know, but certainly we're going to find out in the days ahead unless we act now, and this is the last time. So what I would like to say is just that there is an effort in the House. There are a lot of us that are working very hard to ensure that we can defund Obamacare, but the goal here is full repeal, and that's what we're going to be working hard for. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Marlon Stutzman of Indiana.
Thanks, Brent. Thank you to everybody for being here, and to the senators for coming over, and to those House colleagues. You know, I just want to share briefly, because I can't say much more than what has already been said, but I want to share briefly why this matters so much now and why it matters to me. You know, back home in Northeast Indiana, Fort Wayne Community Schools is the largest school corporation in the state of Indiana. 610 employees had their hours cut because of Obamacare. We have small businesses who are not expanding, they're not growing, they're not hiring because of Obamacare. Now is the time. Now when it really matters. This is the time to stop Obamacare from hurting more Americans across the country. And I am so appreciative of each person up here, the groups that are associated up here, for stepping out and waving the flag now, because we've got 2 months to stop this, to find alternatives, to say to the American people, we're not going to let any further hurt come upon the American economy or upon American people. And this is personal with people, and when they're seeing lower paychecks, when they're seeing their premiums go up, when they're seeing their benefits cut, they are looking to us to stand in the gap to stop this from hurting Americans even more. So thank you again to each of those who are helping with this effort. We believe that with the American people, we will be successful. Thanks again.
Thank you, Congressman. From the Club for Growth, Andy Roth.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you for all of you for coming today. You know, you may look at this as a partisan affair. You may think that we're just a bunch of wacko birds trying to advance our agenda. But I would argue that maybe this is actually common sense. I mean, let's look at it. Labor unions are opposed to this. So when conservatives and labor unions are opposed to something, maybe, just maybe, it might be something we should explore doing. The IRS, mirrored in scandal, is going to be in charge of implementing this. Maybe we should rethink that. The IRS's own labor union is opposed to Obamacare. Maybe we should rethink this. The author of the entire bill thinks it's a train wreck waiting to happen. That's on the left, not on the right. Insurance companies are dropping out of states every day. A day doesn't go by, it seems like, when another insurance company doesn't announce that. And same thing, every day, insurance companies are talking about, or states are talking about, how interest rates or premium rates are going up. Not single digits, double digits, in states all across the country. Maybe we ought to rethink this. And then you've got Obama himself, who's not enforcing it, not enforcing the mandates, and not enforcing the verification system at the IRS, which will invite billions in fraud all across the country. Maybe we should rethink this. That's why we're here today. It's not because of some partisan argument, not because of some agenda that we have, but to actually instill some common sense in what is going on here in DC. Now, the Club for Growth, the group that I represent today, we will be working for the next several weeks to inform voters, to inform club members, and to inform the general public about what's going on. And I think the Club for Growth has a pretty good track record of letting voters know how their lawmakers vote on issues like this. And when this is the most important issue in a generation, we're going to be focusing on this more than ever, because this is our last chance before it gets implemented. And it's a fight, and it's a hill that we got to run up, and this is a battle we got to wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. From Freedom Works, Matt Kibbe.
Sometimes the reasonableness of a proposal in this town is measured by the amount of vitriol and anger and hysteria that it generates. And I think what you're hearing from today is what I would like to call the coalition of the reasonable. It doesn't make any sense to spend money we don't have on something that the architects themselves say is not working. The president says it doesn't work, that the architect of the Senate bill says that it's a train wreck. Every Republican voted against it. Every Republican campaigned against it. And yet in this town, actually doing what those views represent is considered to be extreme. It doesn't make any sense to fund something that nobody in this town doesn't think is working. And that's the position that we're taking. Freedom Works has taken the unique view that for the first time, and I think in our history, of double voting, double scoring the Mike Lee letter and its companion in the House, because we think that this is a measure of reasonableness. Are you actually going to run this country with even a modicum of sense when we're spending so much money we don't have? We're going into the August recess with the support of our millions of members in our communities, understanding that both parties need to be held accountable on this. Senator Cornyn, who was on the Lee letter and has since pulled himself off, his activists in Texas are asking him, why are you now against what you were before? We're going into North Carolina to talk to Senator Burr, but we're also talking to Democrats. If you don't think that this is right for big businesses, the mandate, why is it right for young people making $26,000 a year? It doesn't make any sense. It's not reasonable. I think we have to fight this fight, but the only way we're going to win is the way we've won in the past, from the bottom up, with citizens and voters and the constituents of the senators and congressmen that we're talking to, demanding that they do the right thing, demanding that they do what they said they were going to do. This is the test, and FreedomWorks is all in on this.
From Citizens United, JT Mastronati.
Thank you very much. If you truly support repealing Obamacare, you cannot vote to fund Obamacare. It's that simple. Obamacare is unaffordable, unfair, unpopular, and should be undone before it's too late. In fact, Obamacare should be sent to the ash heap of history right alongside Hillary Care before it bankrupts this country. I am proud to stand here today alongside fellow conservative leaders in support of these critical efforts to defund Obamacare once and for all. Citizens United and its 500,000 members and supporters nationwide are demanding that Republicans in Congress fight for conservative principles by fully supporting these important efforts and act without delay. Thank you.
Embedding cleanup from Family Research Council Action, Tony Perkins.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate you and Jenny Beth and Senator Lee for organizing this effort, and I think our friends from the House that are taking a stand. You know, it's clear from what's been said here, the wheels are coming off the gurney of Obamacare. When the unions are opposed to it, conservatives are opposed to it, and the president himself says the wheels aren't turning, there's a real problem. Now, for the last few months, I've been serving as an interim pastor at a church, and I was meeting with the staff, and we were discussing one of the major concerns of conservatives, social conservatives, has been the issue of the mandate, which, by the way, does not go away with simply defunding. That's why conscience protection has to be a part of this effort, and the leaders in this have agreed that we will address all of the offenses of Obamacare. But I was talking to one of the young pastors who has a family of 4 young kids, and he said he had just gotten notification from his insurer, and they all have individual policies, that come January 1st, his policy is going to go up $330 a month. Now, how many families in America that are having to secure their own insurance can afford that kind of cost? When you've got the cost in transportation, the cost in food, cost in housing, everything going up, the president is going to add insult to injury by giving a pass to the business for now, but making individuals fall under the mandate and eat this additional cost. And I'll tell you, I'm sure this pastor was not alone, wondering where and how he's going to get insurance for his family. Maybe that's what's behind this. Look, Obamacare is not the typical political virus that we're accustomed to that spreads from Washington, D.C., infecting the body politic. This is a rare strain of flesh-eating bacteria that, if not stopped, and stopped now, threatens the very life of our republic. And I've talked to members, and they agree this is the greatest threat to faith, family, and freedom that our nation has seen in decades. And if that's the case, then it must be defunded, and the way to do that is joining with this effort of refusing to put money into the continuing resolution to keep this thing alive. We need to drive a stake through the heart of Obamacare and save the American people.
Thank you, Tony. The senators asked me to apologize for them, but they had a vote that they had to leave for. So I'll open it up for questions at this point. Please aim at whoever you'd like it.
I wanted to ask about a provision that could be hitting close to home for all of you, which is the Grassley amendment to Obamacare, which requires members and their staffs, their aides, to go into the exchanges to get their coverage, and it may mean without the subsidy that they currently get under the federal health care plan. Have you had any members of your staffs come to you concerned about this, who say they may have to leave because they're worried they can't afford to pay for care in the exchanges? And if so, how do you fix that?
And actually, a great question. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what Obamacare does. But when you analyze the bill, and this was talked about back at the time when it passed, the rank and file members of Congress are already under Obamacare and their staffs. There was an exception made for the leadership that are paid out of a different bag of money, and their committee staffs. So they're not under it. So there has been wide discussion, and some of us members of Congress have talked about it, and people have told me that had employees that have been with them for many years, that if they're eligible to retire and they go ahead and do it before December 31st, they can keep the insurance they have right now, which is what every federal worker has across the country. If they stay till January, then they get thrown into Obamacare with me and the other rank and file members, not our leadership, but the rank and file members of Congress and their staffs. And so I can tell you, there are some people, I've been told, that are going to retire in December. They're eligible to retire just so they can keep the insurance they had and not get thrown under the bus with Obamacare that's coming in January. So that has been an issue. It is being discussed, and it is changing lives.
How do you fix it, though, sir?
You get rid of Obamacare and let the American people reform health care. Let us reform health care so the American people can get back to having the best health care in the history of mankind.
Well, I just make this comment. A quote by Abraham Lincoln was, "The best way to get a bad law repealed is to enforce it strictly." And I think that as much as we hate to see how our staff is going to be affected, the American people as a whole are going to be affected as well. And that if we look out for just those in Washington or on our staffs without looking out for every American, shame on us. That's why this bill needs to be, why Obamacare needs to be stopped and repealed, and we start over. It was a bad bill from the very beginning. It's a bad bill now.
What about if going forward, may start with CNS News, what about if going forward there's efforts to partially fund some of Obamacare? Will this coalition support any funding of Obamacare, or is it the whole law?
Go ahead.
Well, I would just suggest that looking at Obamacare in its entirety, when the most egregious provisions are repealed or defunded, Obamacare can't stand. And so the effort needs to be entire repeal. There are certainly health care reforms that need to be had. Health care is important for our country, and everybody understands that. But this is not the right solution. I want to make one other comment, which I think is important. I think there's a lot of misinformation about, discretionary funding and mandatory funding, and can we unfund, mandatory programs with a discretionary, spending bill? And the answer is yes, we can. We do it regularly with the Hyde Amendment as it relates to funding of abortions under Medicare. So the answer is absolutely it can be done. We do it, and so I think that's an important thing to point out. I would also say that, well, we'll just leave it at that there are plenty of opportunities here to defund Obamacare with the CR.
John?
Thank you, Brent. John Gizzi with Newsmax. I'd like to ask the gentleman from the House, you were no doubt encouraged when 1/6 of your colleagues on the Democratic side voted to delay the employer's mandate and 1/7 delay the individual mandate. Is there any indication of strong Democratic support for getting it out of the CR and eventually the delay that you're talking about here?
Well, I think if you look at the marginal districts that Democrats sit in and look at how they voted on delay, I think they will tell you that those members know back home that this is an unpopular bill, and that voting to fund it equates to supporting Obamacare. The polling numbers are only getting worse for the president on support, for public support on Obamacare. And I think that's why we have to hold Congress's feet to the fire on this particular moment, because this is when the rubber hits the road. This is when it really matters. All of these other votes that we have had in the past were token votes, and I think we as Republicans would look inconsistent if 3 weeks ago we voted to delay the business mandate and the individual mandate, but then we don't go to the wall on the CR when it really matters. I think that you will find a lot of members who find themselves in a situation that are supporting Obamacare. They should be thinking twice, because I don't believe most of their constituencies are with them.
And may I ask a question to the House members? Molly Hoover, The Hill News. How much support have you generated over the past few days? I understand that last week Mark Meadows had it was circulating a letter, about 60 members signing it, essentially calling for defunding Obamacare in the CR. Maybe he's picked up a handful more. When do you expect this effort to gain more steam in the House? Have you talked to GOP leaders about it? Have you sat down with Boehner, Cantor, etc., so forth? What's that? What kind of support are you getting?
There's a lot of conversations about finding another way besides the CR. For one thing, we have two bad problems here. First of all, passing another CR. That's a problem in itself. When are we going to start to learn to budget and pass budgets in Washington instead of operating off of a CR that's off of a 2008 budget? Then second of all is the funding of Obamacare. I find broad support amongst my colleagues who have great concerns about it, and as they feel public pressure from folks back home, it obviously is making people take a step back and realize that this is reality. And this is when a vote really, really matters. And so I think there'll be a lot of discussions over the August break. We are having conversations about other ways to procedurally move forward, and it would be without Obamacare funding.
Do you mean procedurally move forward on the CR? Or, I mean, because all of this pretty much rests on the CR, not sort of this piecemeal approach that Boehner was talking about the other day. I mean, because what you're saying is if you don't fund the government, you don't fund Obamacare, and any other bill would be simply symbolic, as you guys
I don't think this is at all about shutting the government down. I think that's a straw man from the White House. We can still fund government. We can pay Social Security checks. We can pay our military personnel. We can make sure that Border Patrol agents has their funding. But we can do this without implementing and paying for Obamacare. And as Congressman Bridenstine mentioned, with the Hyde Amendment, we do touch mandatory spending. So, if people want to get into discretionary or mandatory spending, we can touch them both. I mean, it is Congress.
I want to ask something on the political picture here that folks in this town need to understand. I'm going to ask Jenny Beth. Do you have those numbers?
Yes.
Jenny Beth is going to give you some numbers in a poll that her organization just took as to what voters care about. For putting aside the atrocity of the policy, the voters out there are unequivocally fed up with inaction from those who promised action. It's a very simple proposition. If you fund it, you own it. This is a come to Jesus moment for Republicans. They better get religion soon. Jenny Beth's going to give you the reason why.
66% of likely voters think that this law should not be funded because it's not ready yet. I'm sorry, Brent, I don't have every single thing ready. I think that is the most important one. 66% of voters think the law should not be funded because it's not ready to be implemented. The way to delay the implementation is to stop the funding, and the best way to stop the funding is to do that in the upcoming continuing resolution.
Can I ask you a question? Did you ask in your poll whether people would rather see the government shut down rather than fund the Affordable Care Act and the CR?
We're not for shutting down the government. The point is, we want to fund. The point is this.
It's a hypothetical political question, but it gets to Brent's point, which is, in the event the president doesn't defund his signature legislative achievement the Democrats were after for about 75 years, the government could shut down. And and just because I like polling, I just thought
All right,
I'd ask
and
if you asked the question.
we have asked questions and we've done more polling. I'm still getting numbers, and we'll be able to release those later today or tomorrow, so we can follow up with you on that. We literally were in the field with 1,000 people on Monday night and Tuesday night, and I want to make sure I give you accurate numbers. But we do have information on that. The vast majority, well, in this particular instance, the statement I made, the majority do not want to fund something that's not ready to be implemented. It's our taxpayer money that would go to do this. And they're already giving waivers to big business, to big labor, and the president's up here behind closed doors making crony deals to give breaks to big government too. What about the American people who are working hard to pay for all of this? It's time to delay it. The only way to delay it is to stop the funding of it.
I apologize to Jenny Beth for that. I caught her off guard. She can release those numbers that have already been released. She can give them to you. And don't quote me on this because it's not accurate, but it's something like by 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, voters in districts around the country are willing to fund primary opponents to Republicans who break their word on Obamacare. But Jenny Beth can get those full numbers.
I'll have numbers later. I'll get you numbers later this afternoon.
I just, as a member of Congress, I want to be absolutely clear about one thing, and that is that nobody wants a government shutdown. Absolutely nobody. In fact, if you want to get rid of Obamacare, a government shutdown doesn't do it because a lot of it is mandatory spending. What we want to do is we absolutely want to fund the entire government, and we want to not fund that one element of Obamacare. And we want to fund the government. The question is, and we will, that's what we should do. We should absolutely fund all of the government except Obamacare, and then see if the Democrats want to shut it down. We don't want to shut it down.
Okay, can I just want to add an asterisk. Some of us don't want to fund everything in government. Some of us don't want to fund a whole hell of a lot that's in the CR. We're willing to bite the bullet on all manner of things we don't want in order to get rid of this monstrosity. Yes, ma'am.
Abby Phillip, ABC News. Ted Cruz mentioned earlier that they just need about 41 Republicans to come together to support this, but how do you do that if there isn't leadership from Mitch McConnell, your organization? Sent a shot across the bow to him earlier today, saying that he's not kind of leading on this issue. So how's that possible?
Well, because we do believe that people like Senator McConnell, Leader McConnell, and Leader Boehner could honor what they are telling their own constituents. As we speak, Senator McConnell is sending emails to his voters championing repealing Obamacare, and I applaud him for that. He's got to fund it. So we're simply saying this is where the rubber meets the road. You have to do it. I agree with Senator Cruz. All sorts of movements have started with a handful of people, and a tsunami is built. When we proposed cut, cap, and balance 2 years ago, initially nobody was in favor of it. By the time it ended, it passed in the House, and every Republican was in favor of it. So things could change, and we believe things will. Yes, sir. Last question.
Blake Hill, just to clarify, you said voters may be willing to fund primary opponents, but just to be clear, will your organizations consider opposition to this effort sufficient to back primary opponents against House Republicans?
I speak only for myself. For America, to the degree we can, yes. Does anybody want to say?
We're double weighing the vote, and our voting ratings very much help us determine where we invest our political resources. We've certainly been open to the proposition before.
Andy, you want to say anything? We got to wrap it up.
Yeah, just very quickly, I want to make clear, we needed reform. There were a lot of things we could have agreed on that we offered to agree on before Obamacare passed. Let's do this, what we know will work, and it was shoved down the Congress's throat, it was shoved down the American people's throat, and that is no way to pass litigation. So we still need the reform, but this isn't it, and we'll do what we can to stop it.
Thank you very much.